All right, we're here for new 4coder Friday. As I do with all my videos, I'm starting off with a reminder that the work I do here, that I stream on Twitch, and that I do behind the scenes, it's all funded by people like you who see this and decide to go check out mrforth.com/membership and consider becoming a supporter or member. It's much appreciated whenever someone does do that because I'm counting on getting as many people as possible backing this so these kinds of projects can keep going for, well, for as long as they take. Today I'm working on 4coder, doing 4coder Friday stuff. I'm not actually working on 4coder. We are reviewing the 4coder code base, talking about what did and didn't work out, and what I would do differently, stuff like that. And so, as you might be interested in 4coder, you can check it out at 4coder.net. There's a Discord community over here where people can help you out with stuff. There's lots of documentation on how things work on the website. So check that out. And for now, let's get into it. So I've been trying to think about what to do today. The first two times I got into reviewing stuff, it was pretty easy. I just had something fall on my lap that was worth checking out. This time, not 100% as easy, but I think it might be good to get into the custom layer and talk a little bit about some of the things that happen here in the custom layer. And I think, well, there are two big ones that come to mind, and I think I want to pick one of those. So one is the config system. We get into how the config system is working right now and just take a good look at all of it. What is it? What is it providing, and what is it making too complicated? And then we can also get into the languages support. Right now there's the CPP Lexer generator and Lexer test and the Lexer generator. And then the generated Lexer CPP stuff and like how all that plugs in and the code index. So that's a big complicated one. I think either of those would be worthwhile to look into. I think for starters I want to do config because I'm feeling a little bit like the code index stuff might take multiple sessions. So let's start with the small one and maybe do the big one next week. And if the small one gets done early, then we can fit in some other custom layer exploration stuff. Hello, Tool. I forgot one important step of my pre-stream setup. Let me go do something. And then we've got this. Okay. So let me take a quick look through this config stuff and see what I was thinking. Line number, column number, okay. Config error. Doubly linked list of them. File name. Position. Text. This must be the message of the error. There's going to be a conversion from this position pointer to line number, column number, probably. Error list keeps a doubly linked list of these. Okay. Okay. So we got this parser context kind of thing. It is keeping track of which token we're on and when the last token, where the last token will be, or the end of the tokens will be. It knows the file name of the data it's parsing. It has the data. It has the memory allocator, and it has the list of errors. Does it also generate? Why doesn't it also? Well, the arena presumably is being used to allocate these, but what about the output from parsing? We'll find out, I guess. Identifier index, R value type, Boolean integer config compound first last count. So an element is way down here. Is a doubly linked list of those. Layout L R value. Ooh, I'm getting lost. What are these things? Config R value. Has a type. And then a value. L value. Boolean, integer, unsigned integer. So I can treat the integer type either way, I guess. String. Not sure why there's a character type. And then it can also be a compound. Okay. Config integer. Comes back with a Boolean for is signed, huh? Okay, so what's nice is this one actually has a bunch of function declarations in the header. So this got written apparently a little later on when I was responsible enough to sort out all the functions in the header, although there's no guarantee these match in the CPP file perfectly. So I don't know if I was doing that yet. Okay, let me keep going through the types. I think the types are more instructive than anything else. Layout type, unset, identifier, integer. Layout type, position, identifier, integer. So a compound is a list of these things, which each have a layout and an R value. The layout tells us if we're looking at an identifier or an integer key, and the R value gives us a value for the thing. Okay. An assignment has a position, an L value, and an R value, and a flag on it that tells whether or not we've visited it, I guess. Okay. Okay, config iteration. Why do we have config iteration? Okay. Get result. Boolean, integer, unsigned integer, string, character, compound. So again, it's sort of like an R value. It's like an R value again. A little confusing. Iteration step. Good, skip, quit. Don't know what that means yet. Okay. So that's how the config parser is working. What does require? I think this will probably be one of my dumb macros somewhere. Yeah. So these are bad. You don't want to do this. So when you look at yeah. So let's talk about this a little bit. When you're scrapping together your own little recursive descent parser, which is what this is, right? This is gonna start trying to parse. If you go and look at like recursive descent implementation stuff, they'll start doing stuff like this where it'll be like, okay, if we match, you know, an open parenthesis, right, and then you have like you've got your parser, right, and then you do stuff, and then you have like require blah 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 version. I don't care. These things here, you know, you can get a bunch of fancy ones. There's like parse next. There's if, you know, parse match is usually like something like first do a parse require and then do a parse next, right? So something like this, or something like function composition. It's this is something like this, right? We require something, and if that fails, then we'll fail out of the whole thing. If it doesn't fail, then we're gonna parse next. And you can see I'm like, function composition isn't quite the right language for this, but that's the idea. It's like, it's literally more like this, if this, then this. Except there's also like else return or something, like it's gotta quit out. I don't know. It's all like magic and weird, and I wouldn't do it that way anymore because I don't like having to figure out what the little tricks are. I don't like all these freaking early returns. It's not worth it. Makes it really hard to figure out when certain code paths get reached if you have early returns. So, not a fan. Okay. When else is version relevant, though? Do we still have like a version 1 and a version 2 present here? I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't do any of those helper functions anymore. I just handwrite things like expect and look ahead and all of that. Like, all the parser jargon that they give you for like, oh, you know, the grammar, because you know what they're gonna point out that like, hey, if you write your grammar down, you got like your compound is a, you know, open, you know, maybe it's written something like this, like you got one of these and you got one of these and you got like a compound element list, and the compound element list is going to be, you know, a compound element followed by optionally a compound element list question mark with a comma there, right? Like something like that, or whatever, something like that. And then the parser literature is going to tell you to like look at this and turn this into your recursive descent and say like, okay, here's where you can say like require this or expect this or whatever. And if it's not that, then the compound thing won't work. Or here we'll have integer, string, identifier, right? Whatever. The problem is, I just don't like the code when it's done. I don't know what the code does. If you write the code by following the grammar and doing like match this, oh, fail out, like whatever, at the end the code doesn't look like code. It looks like some kind of weird, hacky side language that is always a little bit too magical. And so I've just always found it easier to just write the recursive descent by hand without the correspondence to the grammar that the literature harps on. It's just way easier. Maybe we'll write a parser sometime to show you what I mean. Config search list. Vars get root. There's so much stuff in here that I don't even know what it's talking about. Def search normal load list. Like these aren't. This is not. Like I don't have any way to. Def. What is def short for in all of this? I don't even know that. Default, maybe? Default search normal load list. So this is an output list, I guess. Well, a lot of the literature is going to tell you to do stuff like the look ahead, consume, expect stuff. And that's the stuff that I am saying I don't like to do. Project save string lit prg config. What is that even talking about? Config lookup table. So here's a hidden function. Def config lookup table. Session config, project config, user config, def config. Right, I think there's this whole like table lookup thing. V1 to V2. So right here we have project V1. Okay. We're still unraveling the config system. We're not even really critiquing it. I'm just trying to even make sense of it. So hopefully you realize, if you're watching, that the amount of time it's taking for me to make sense of it is already a problem. But let's see here. We know this is relevant. We know this is relevant. And now we're finding project V1. What happened here? What was I up to? I'm going to try to figure that out. So there's kind of a, like, half-hearted project system in here. Project pattern node, project pattern list, open file flag, setup status, key strings, script flags. I don't see where the project itself is, but that's probably just a config file now, right? So if I have a config, yeah, all of this was before Metadesk. Man, the config system is just so big and I can't even get my head around it. Search normal load list. What does that mean? It's taking in an arena. It's just returning a list, right? PRG, PRJ var, vars read key. What is that? Vars get root. There are so many things here. Okay, vars get root. What are we talking about? Variable handle. Vars global root. If this is the first call, get nil putter. Parent next, first, last. Vars global root handle. Okay. Okay. So that's how we get the root. Path from project. Full file path from project. String from var. Where is that? Variables. Yeah, I'm clearly not happy with myself here. Okay. This might be one of the worst things that I did in 4coder. The more I'm looking at it, the more I'm like, geez, I did not know what I was doing at all. This is going to take a while to unravel, more than I thought. I'm starting to get, like, look at this, dynamic. There's another set of variable systems. I did not know what I was doing. Okay. Okay. What do the variables do? Vars save string means... Okay, vars init. What is that talking about? Oh my gosh, it's like a global... Okay, okay, here we go. Hidden functions. It's okay. Vars init. I guess we just call that on all of these because we don't have proper initialization. Yeah, yeah. This right here, if you're going to have global variables and you're going to need a init, that's where you really wish you could have that, the thing that I have in my code base now, the like, right, you wish you could do something like this and then just have the DLL load stuff like this, or run stuff like this on startup. Yeah, this config stuff is way off. It's way off. I think it would be interesting to talk about how I would design a config system now, but I want to dissect this one first because it's huge. And, well, I've already started, so here we go. Vars arena, vars string to ID, table data U64. So this must be like a string const table or something. Table U64 data, a vars ID to string. We got a reverse lookup. Vars string ID counter, string ID. Very good. String ID sitting right here getting defined. That shouldn't be happening. Oh well. So we have save string comes in. This was perfectly fine, but for some reason I made it again. Don't know. Don't ask. Table lookup. See if that string data is already in the table. Our table lookups are complicated because I'm not yet sure how to write tables that aren't complicated. So we've got like all these different styles of tables. Okay. Not ideal. You can do better. Don't copy this. So if we found a match, then if we found a match, then the string to ID location result. What are we doing here? getting the string ID out based on this location. Otherwise, we create a new ID. We're going to return that. We're going to copy the string data. And then we're going to insert the string data and the ID into the new table, into the two tables. Okay. So it's a string const. It's a really bad string const. Okay. And read string just takes the ID back to a string. So a variable handle. I still don't really know what purpose all this serves, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. I do believe I might have been looking for the metadesk idea, which I didn't find until later. We don't have dates, so we don't know for sure. But I was looking for this sort of Lego bricky kind of information handling system. Sure. One sec. Let me pull up Metadesk for you. I believe I host a copy of it over here, but let me double check. Maybe I don't. Okay. Okay. Google.com. Metadesk Dion. Oh, that one's out. Just take this one. GitHub.com/RyanFlurry/Metadesk. Right here. The big idea is that it parses a file into a tree of these things, and then you can do whatever you want with that. So it's a nice starting point for any kind of meta programming thing you want to make where you don't want to have to write your own basic parser. You just have to learn the Metadesk grammar and work within it. So variables contain trees of additional a variable is a tree of variables. And it has a key and value string. Okay, so I have a variable handle and I have a key. I put those in, I scan, I find a match, I return it. That gets the key back from a variable. This gets the key back as a string ID. So now I have a way to get some value information out. I can get it as a string, as a bool, or as a U64. I can set the string. Yeah, go ahead, send me a question. I might not be the one to answer it because I'm not much of a 4coder expert all the time, but if you put the question out there, I can either point you in the right direction or probably someone else in the chat will. So we're looking for a node under the var whose key matches this. Once we have a match, if it's not nil, we free the children. If it is nil, well, either way, we end up zeroing out the children, setting the value to 0. Hey, look at that. You figured out the bug. Yeah, there's a clipboard bug here where I can't seem to figure out how to get the clipboard. And so sometimes if I come over here and I copy, Here, let me find a good example of this. You go away. Let's say I'm over here and I go copy, and then I go over to 4coder and I do paste. There, it grabbed that one. Say I grab this and I go paste. So these are all happening to work right now. Let's see. Let's try MSDN. That seems to screw it up a lot. That one worked. Win32 virtual alloc. There we go. Okay, it's working today. Can't seem to get it to trip. It only ever trips when you're not trying to get it to. I don't know why. But I have this bug that comes up where the clipboard doesn't seem to work when you're pasting into 4coder from somewhere else. And I think you figured out why. Alright, so I'm going to copy this. This is a good suggestion over to here. And I'm going to copy this. Back to here. There it is. Didn't work. Okay, so you know how the bug gets created. Do you know what the bug is? Like, is this the fix to the bug right here? Is that the way you fixed it? Hmm. Hmm. You mean like this? Yeah, I'm not sure I understand why that makes a difference. So if I post to the clipboard, it updates the sequence number. If I fail to save the new sequence number, then when I go to read from the sequence clipboard, I get sequence number. And what, they're the same? Shouldn't they still be different? It's confusing to me. I don't know. I'll need to test and mess around with this some other time. I've had other people telling me that the problem here... Yeah, so the reason I was repeating this was because people were telling me that the bug came from the fact that this... And I never really bought this explanation. It seemed off. But they told me that this open clipboard can fail, and if it does, you got to try again, because it means some other program has it held open. But doing this didn't seem to fix it. Doing this might have been the more accurate way to take their suggestion. Either way, it sounds like that was the wrong suggestion. I don't care. Thanks for pointing this out to me. It's useful to know. I'm gonna go back to what I was doing though. What is this? I see. So this is creating a new empty node. No need to apologize. You pointed out something useful. It's good. It's just the clipboard problem has been annoying to me for a long time, and you're basically pointing out the solution is in a completely different direction than what a bunch of other people have suggested for a long time, which is good to know. It's real progress on the clipboard bug. It just means that, like, whenever someone tells you that the problem with something is like, oh, it's this, and you need to like spam X to make it work, I always get this feeling in my gut that's like, that doesn't sound right. Unless we're talking about like low level atomics, interchange kinds of things, like if it's multi-threaded, lock-free, something or other, then spamming a thing, sitting and spinning on a thing is a real move there. But usually the solution of just call it 8 times and hope that one of them works isn't the right solution. And it's just embarrassing that I like went for it when there was a real solution. So this sets this key to point to this string inside of this variable container and returns the new variable for it. Okay. So I know how the variables system works now. We've read through that part. Back to scratch. What was relevant before that was prgv1. Also, while we're at it, 4coder project commands.h and cpp are also relevant. Name command out. Okay, so these are the commands. Project system. Okay, so this one is taking in an old school style config, or project one. Windows project v1. Wait, are there not? Okay, so I didn't declare all the functions up here that I could have. So what this appears to be doing parse from config. Okay, so what is this doing? Don't care. There's so much crap. There's so much crap in all these files. Okay, so this project here, this system here takes in a already parsed config of the config type. Like, we've got the full config. And we're going to create a project v1 struct and pull everything out of the config and into this hard-coded project version 1 struct, little by little. You can see here I had an old function called flatten, which apparently didn't work, and I made a new one called join. In my new code bases, join is the keyword I use, the function name that I use for joining lists of strings into a single string. So you can see the little roots of my naming scheme evolving towards that. So once we've converted a config into a v1, we then go through and pull out all these IDs that we're going to need. So we save string for all these different keys to make a bunch of string IDs. That's what we have to do. And we get the root of the variable system. We use string lit. Why are these all doing save string lit and this is using the macro? It's a little confusing, right? Why aren't these like save string straight lit all just doing save string lit? You know what I mean? Seems confusing. And then, you know, we could be doing this. Yeah, I'm going to go back to the clipboard for a sec to comment on that some more. I really don't think the retry loop should be necessary, and I'll tell you why. With things like this, in theory, the retry loop might make a difference, because it's true, open clipboard is an exclusive lock that multiple programs might be taking. But the only time a clipboard is supposed to be taking this is when it is attempting to paste, and it has... like, this setup here should already be happening. So unless I have managed to trigger 2 programs with something like Control V or right-click paste or something, at the exact same moment, well-behaved programs shouldn't actually be taking this at the same time. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't beneficial to keep retrying, because I guess it could happen. But in reality, what tends to happen with something like this is, like, unless I let this go on forever, 8 tries happens in an instant. And so whatever the other program is doing, unless it also happens in an instant, it's often the case that, like, it'll be, if it's possible for me to try this once, I'm easily going to try and fail 8 times before the other program gets to continue and make progress to closing the clipboard. That's just the likely scenario. It's not very likely that 2 separate cores have 2 separate processes, both opening clipboard, and so that 8 tries will make a big difference. Now, with that said, doing an infinite loop right here isn't really viable either. So the question becomes, like, well, what do we do? Do we have like a sleep and back off? Do we just accept that sometimes when we get clipboard, it's gonna fail and we're gonna have to try again the next frame or something? Like, there's a lot of ways you could imagine slowing this down, but the real practical answer is this is never actually an issue, I don't think. There's no reasonable timing for when this would actually matter. So I think it could just be like this if the main thing is solved. I think this doesn't make any difference. That's my opinion. That's my guess. Right, and the other thing we would have to do is not update this, so it would be like this. Then update the clipboard sequence number, right? Like, this is probably the right thing, based on what you're saying. Right? The Lego in chat says they had to do something similar and gave it a 500 millisecond cooldown to try again. Yeah, that might be the kind of thing you could do that would work. Just try once and then... milliseconds? 500 milliseconds? You give it half a second to stall the thread? That seems excessive. You mean microseconds? Man, 500 milliseconds seems like a lot. That means missing that's a half a second of not getting back to the rendering on the main loop, on the main thread. Project ID, vars save string, parsed file name. Okay, so we save the file name of the project as the prg config variable. Version string, vars new variable, version ID. So if we get a version back from our parse project, we put it there into the version ID variable. All of these variables now go under the project variable. So what's happening here is that project version 2 gets encoded into the variable system. And the root of the variable system for the project is the project var here. So all of these are getting encoded into the project var. The project var itself is encoded with the variable name prj config and with the string value, the name of the file, and then all the things hanging off of it are the project itself. So I can understand why I would do that. Load pattern vars, string ID, prg pattern list, pattern vars, pattern ID, project pattern list, blacklist patterns ID, blacklist pattern list, pattern var opl plus array count, pattern vars less than opl, pattern var plus equals 1, patterns new variable, project var, project pattern var ID I equals 0, blah 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 blah. Sounds like both of the operating systems have a similar clipboard locking approach. And that seems unfortunate. It seems like it could be designed better than that. So yeah, this is just loading up all of the variables from the project config thing. Not very impressive to me. There's kind of a lot of redundancy here because of the number of layers of trying to figure things out that happened. Part of it is that I wanted to be able to do this. I wanted to be able to print this thing, so you can see like here prj config, the name of the project file, and then like all of these all of this is the variable structure being dumped. And I wanted something like this to make the config system easier to debug. But I should have just designed the data structure that represents the variable system and the config data types to match very one-to-one with the grammatical features of the config parser and the dumper, so that they all kind of went together, because we could have collapsed this down to like one single layer. But anyway, so that's how that's working. So we can take a text file to a config. We can take a config to a prjv1. We can take a prjv1 into a variable handle prjv2. Project commands has all this stuff in it. What is this? Pattern list from var. Pattern standard blacklist is blah. Close files with extension. Don't know what that has to do with anything. Open files pattern list recursive. Open files pattern filter, or open all files with extension in hot. So my god, so much nonsense. Okay. Stringize project. So here's a variable handle for the project. Version project name. Stringizing. Version. So this is writing out a real project file in the grammar that the parser understands. And that's why it's different from the dumper. Again, no one-to-one, so dumping the variables that describe the project system is not the same thing as stringizing it to a project file, which uses a completely different grammar filled with keywords and special cases. Totally unnecessary nonsense. Yeah, this isn't a bug so much as it's just sloppiness. Printing out a batch, printing out a bash. In my version, this right here has a bug in it that's super annoying, where these are semicolons and this is a second build or something like that. It's like they're like this. It's nice to see that's fixed. It breaks displaying error messages from configs. Oh, does it? Didn't know about that. So again, printing out a project this time. This is what the default project is. We don't have any way to construct a default project and then dump it, even though we just wrote code for rendering out projects up here. What we're missing is code for the generating a default project so that we could run it through that. And so instead we hand write a empty project builder, or close to empty project builder. It still has the names of the project in the script here. Anyway, all of that is for setting up a new empty project. Project operations, executing a command, pass down the command variable. Fill var from config. That's the one I've been missing. So this one is going to take the config that we've got there and the key in the parent. Create a new variable pointing at that file name and then fill that variable. Dump R value. I'm gonna need to take a 5-minute break. Okay. Fill var from config. So that's the part I'm confused about. This only appears to be doing a top level scan. There must be something recursive in here. Here it is. Vars dump R value calls vars dump R value again under those conditions. So when you have a config and you're trying to dump it, you give it a location where to put it. And an R pointer, what is that for? That's the R value you're trying to dump. There's the L value where you want to store it, destination. Yeah. Okay, yeah, all of this could be way simpler by just so much simpler. All of this was before I really understood Lego bricking anything, so it's way overcomplicated, lots of switching and stuff. But ultimately what it comes down to is when you have a config struct, there is a way to dump that straight into a variable handle. Okay. This exists in order to make version 1 projects workable, so we can still parse a project v1 using the old parser. And then well, I guess the config parser still works for both is the point. So we can still go text to config to prjv1 and then turn that into this. Because if we went from this to this and this to this, it wouldn't actually work. It wouldn't make a valid layout. Just fine. Okay. There are other types of user directory binary. Got it. All these little mini wrappers make it so hard to figure out who's depending on the normal load list. So like, look at this. I have this concept of a normal load list, and to track down all of the places where I'm using it, I have to go boom, save all of this. Then for each of those, I have to go boom, is this just wrapping or implementing a small little mini wrapper? And if it is, that's also part of the list. So this got deleted so that this could take over. There we go. Okay, we're still trying to track these down. We've already accounted for that. What about this one? Again, more. Good. Again, so we've seen this one, this one, this one, declaration, and then a usage right here. Okay. Hey, welcome. Glad you're following along. Oh, man. Okay, so there's still so much stuff that this handles. So dynamic load config and apply. Review this function. It says, yeah, for sure. Here we go. We're gonna do this. This right here, it's now. I don't know when I wrote the to do, but we're finally getting to it. Out arena. Apparently, we're clearing the arena first. Here you can see us doing a little conflict resolution scratch block. Search normal F open. So this is opening config.4coder for reading from the normal search list. If that comes back as non-zero, we load from it. And then we parse it. If we parse successfully, weird. Why doesn't that work today? That's why. Okay. So if we did parse successfully, we look at the errors and we dump those. This is load in config and apply. So this is looking for config.4coder. Now config.4coder has the same format, but it's just a bunch of configuration variables. And so we just dump that straight in to make the main config. And then we print the config. Well, FreaksYes asks an interesting question, which I'm going to read out loud and talk about for a minute. I'm going to read the whole thing. So he says, I've been wanting to write my own text editor for a while as a learning experience, as well as building something that I personally would enjoy using. I saw a video by Casey a while back where he said something along the lines of, if you're going to write a text editor, you should just fork 4coder and use its already built features and build on top of it. Do you suggest I start that way first, or should I go through the process from scratch to learn the basics? Okay. It took me 5 years to write 4coder, and I would say of that, about 2.5 to 3 years to get to a basic working text editor with all the main features. If you want to get to the point where you've finished your text editor and you're working within it in a reasonable amount of time, then I think that starting from 4coder and building custom layer on top of it, as BYP is saying, is the right way to go. That'll let you customize and figure out the layouts you want, figure out the features you want. And some of it might be a little hard to figure out how to do within the custom layer, but it'll at least get you thinking about what you do and don't want from day one. If you start from, I'm going to build my own text editor from scratch, you're going to be doing things like, how do I render to the screen? How am I going to get keyboard input correct? How am I going to get the clipboard working? How am I going to get layout of text on the screen working? How am I going to get file saving and loading working? How am I going to browse the file directory for the files that I want to open and close? How am I going to organize projects? How am I going to organize color coding? How am I going to get syntax highlighting? How am I going to get like, what's my buffer data structure going to look like? You're going to be doing all of that stuff, and all of it's interesting and worthwhile, but it's not like that. It's not like there's not that much space in there for doing groundbreaking great stuff, especially if it's going to be your first time, because there's a lot of learning along the way. So if you do a text editor, whether you want syntax highlighting, you're going to be learning things like how to write a parser, or at least a lexer. You're going to be learning about how to lay out text. You're going to be learning about how to handle UTF-8 if you're going to handle Unicode from multiple languages, right? You're going to be learning a lot of this basic, not I don't want to say basic. You're going to be learning a lot of these groundwork things that where there's just not that much room for innovation just to get to the point where 4coder is. And then if you wanted to play with something like, hey, virtual whitespace is cool, but it's not quite right. I want a different idea. Or I want to organize the UI and the flow in a way that just really busts out of the 4coder framework. You would eventually get there, but again, that's like in 2.5, 3, 4 years. However, there's also a lot that I learned from that. I don't think that there's any way to make a better editor than to start from that point. At a certain level, there's stuff you will never be able to do if you don't bust out and start from scratch. And there's also stuff you learn that you can use again. So it really isn't a question I can answer for you. It comes down to you resolving for yourself if practice and learning all the hard nonsense is going to be fun for you, or if you're more excited about designing a text editor. Totally unrelated question from Terrius Python. What was the motivation behind virtual whitespace? Just because you wanted to experiment with the concept, or was there some other motivation? I ask because I noticed you don't use line wrapping, so you don't get what I consider the nicer parts of it. Honestly, I can't remember. I think the idea of virtual whitespace I think it mostly came from the fact that I didn't like messing with the auto indenter. Like, I had an auto indenter, and so you could write some code, and like in the Emacs mode, if you turn off virtual whitespace, let's try this. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Ignore my random spamming in the chat, not where I meant to send my text. Let's turn off virtual whitespace for a moment, then things like this start happening where you go like, okay, boom, right, it automatically indents, and you go, okay, I want foo.bar equals baz foo close, and you can see it automatically updates the position like that. And then occasionally you just have things where you go like, okay, I'm going to take this and paste it here, and oh, paste has to auto indent, and eventually it just gets to the point where it's like you're moving the text around and it's doing annoying weird things that you're not expecting sometimes, and I just kind of wanted to not have to do any amount of managing on that white space, and that's where virtual white space came from. It's like, look, there's really only one correct layout for any given piece of code, in my opinion, in terms of the leading white space. There's never an exception. That's not quite true. There's one time that there's an exception, and that's in block comments, which proved to be difficult to deal with, and I never did. But yeah, that was pretty much it. It was just like, I don't want to have to occasionally run the auto indenter myself, so let's eliminate it for good for all of time. I don't know anything about Helix. Never heard of it. Good question. So Mixer ID asks, what do you think about function names like push buffer range? Let's look for where this gets implemented. So let's see what it does. Creates a restore point on the arena, pushes that much, reads that much. Out of the buffer into the memory. Okay, so my answer is, I think in the 4coder context, this is not the worst name ever, because the push functions were often arena pushes, but I wouldn't do this anymore. This is, so Arena is very base layer, so it's sort of endemic. It's always reasonable to assume Arena is present. So I don't necessarily think this would be classified as an Arena function. It would be classified as a buffer function. And I would probably name it something like buffer read range. I'd give it the app. I'd give it the Arena, and I'd give it the buffer ID, and I'd give it the range, right? So my new API for it would look like this. Or it could be like this, buffer push range, something like this. The point is, read range, I think copy range might be better. I think that's pretty good. I can understand the confusion. That's like what things are modifying a buffer and what things are reading it, and the grammar here is always a little busted. So trying to be very careful about these is important to me now more than it used to be. And I watch out for ambiguities where this would probably I'd probably class this as 1, too ambiguous, and 2, it's not namespaced. I didn't used to properly namespace things. This should be namespaced as a buffer function as far as I'm concerned now. Alrighty, so here I've got a bunch of config stuff that was being set as global variables, global set setting, change mode, set active colors. And my to do here is saying this isn't really what I want. I don't want to load a config file and apply it in one go, because I want these to not be global variables that get set, but rather I want whenever I would know, for instance, let's take a look at change mode. Whenever I would like to know the value of fcoder mode, what should be happening is this should not be a variable, and instead I should be reaching in to this config string then to find out what it is. And if I want to change that mode after loading the config and applying it, then I should be changing this thing. But instead I have this variable system, right? We looked at variable.h. I have this system, and I use that to represent the config, and then I'm pulling stuff out and putting it into regular old C variables so that they are two separate copies of the state, and only this one actually matters. It's a mess. Shouldn't be that way. Okay. So I think I've done enough looking at this. I've got the main idea. And the main idea is once we have one of these variable handles, we have a way of going from a variable handle. We got like a config one, and we got a variable handle theme version, and we got a variable handle bindings version. Right, if we go over here and look at dynamic bindings, I think we can see once again that I'm going to be pulling in a config file and then using all the assignments in that config file. Let's see, do I have a bindings 4coder? Yeah, so I do that, and then I'm just going through these. And these each form a separate map. Map name ID. What is select map? So this used to be mapping scope. Yeah, this is all nonsense. So once upon a time, I was using these macros to make the dynamic map. There's these mappings from keys to commands, right? And from like other types of events, special events to command functions. And it used to be defined in C code using these macros to make it look pretty. So it looked like not C code. The more coding I've done, the less I like it when I do this stuff. I don't want magic macros changing the language so that a special little file can be summoned into existence that sort of mixes C code with macros that need to be held together just so. If I was gonna say, hey, I just want a list, I would do a next list these days, right? I would go X, let's take a look here. Something like this. Try to grab a few of these and go like, okay, here's the new plan. Boom. Right? That would be my bindings list now. It would look like this. Some problems that I see here. I can't actually do a var list like that. Okay, so this is wrong. This should be this. And this is wrong. This should probably be like this maybe would work. Right? Like you just do something like this. Say, there we go. You might also say we don't need quotes on any of this to make it work. Yep, most stuff lives in the custom layer. It's true. It was pretty much always possible, but it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder than you realize to make sense out of the custom layer without the ability to look through the core and see the structure. And the core is not as clean and simple as it could be either. So if I was going to do a day one mapping system, it would look like this. Actually, I'd probably also won't switch it, if I'm being honest. It'd probably look like this. Like, let's say... Whoops. Let's say it would look like this. And the nice thing about that would be that there'd be no such thing as these map rows here, which I just don't need anymore. Mapping scope wouldn't need to exist. We can see what it used to look like. Here's what the code used to look like for setting up them. They still exist. This is still how it's done. This I wouldn't do anymore. This seems silly to me. It feels silly, not helpful. Here I'm using the same macros, which makes this code even more difficult to understand than this code because it's like real code mixing in with the magic macros. So we're selecting a map dynamically. We're ultimately creating bindings, I assume. Where is the bind macro? Oh, we didn't do the bind macro. Okay. But you can see here we're scanning all this config stuff. Config get result list. Such long names. Never could think of better names back in those days. Okay. Reference list. Something, something, something. Like, who knows what this means? Typed compound array reference list. What is that? It's a function. Why does it sound like a noun? Config get result list. Typed array reference list. What does that mean? We're expecting sooner or later, by the way, to switch from what I'm doing over to another 4coder stream being put on by Abner and BYP. I don't know if that's still coming today, but it was discussed. Why is Discord not opening now? Come on. For some reason I can't get Discord up, but that's fine. The question about do crazy expensive asserts, so whenever I had a bug that would require that could be easily solved by asserting extra stuff that was too expensive normally, I would turn this on. So like, it's possible to write an assert that is not constant time, and usually we don't do that, right? Usually you don't stop and say like, hey, assert that every doubly linked list, the forward arrow and the backward arrow are like consistent. They agree from beginning to end. And usually you don't spam in asserts to that effect everywhere that you modify the list because they're slow to do. But if I ever did want to, I could just go if do crazy expensive asserts, and if, right, assert, or like for node equals first, node does not equal 0, node equals node next. If node prev does not equal 0, node prev next equals node assert, right? You do something like this, and then you just leave it there until you're done with debugging whatever you're debugging. And if you forget to take it out, then when you ship, it won't slow anybody down. Okay, with the rest of the time we've got, I want to keep mapping out what these things were like. So basically we can get a variable handle from a config and treat it as any of these things. We can also cast it through the version 1 project first, just to get the translation into a version 2 project. So let's talk a little bit about how I would build a config system now while we have some time. So I think the main thing that's concerning to me about the config system that exists is that there are just too many extra layers. It shouldn't require variables. And you know what, while we're at it, there's a whole other variable system in here. What is this one doing? Managed objects, managed ID set, dynamic workspace, lifetime key. Okay, so this is the one. Lifetime. Yeah, this provides us with these ideas of managed scopes, ultimately. Don't worry about asking lots of questions. I'm here to talk about 4coder and what's going on with it. I think the do crazy expensive asserts is not that unusual, but I can understand why it's confusing when you just see it. It's just a little trick, a little personal trick for me. Might not fit with the way a lot of other people approach things. But you can see here we're getting things like create user managed scope, view get scope, buffer get managed scope, view get managed scope, create user managed scope, destroy user managed scope, get global managed scope. There's another one in here. Manage scope. What was it called? Managed scope. Clear contents. Get managed scope with multiple dependencies. That's what I called it? Damn. Y'all put up with all of this? What the heck is a dynamic workspace, by the way? It's attached to a managed scope, so why isn't it just the managed scope itself? Why does it have a separate handle? Well, the managed scope thing was really useful in concept. I just did a very bad job of creating an API that would make sense of it to anyone. But this was necessary for things like search, actually. Like if I do this, you notice how it makes these marks that persist, and if I come up here and I start editing, the fact that it still jumps to the correct lines after the edit is only possible because of buffer markers, which I'm sure you understand. But buffer markers by themselves have a problem, which is that the memory, the data structure for the buffer marker only means something so long as this exists, because this is the interface for activating the buffer markers, and so long as each of these individual buffers exist. So as long as API implementation is open as a buffer, and as long as this buffer is here providing the interface with those jump tos, those buffer markers are useful for jumping to them. And coloring them, it doesn't always make sense. It's kind of ugly sometimes, but it at least makes logical sense. And so the ability to destroy them when I do this, or to destroy them when I do this, right, first I gotta create them, or to destroy them when I do this, that requires managed scopes with intersecting lifetimes. And we can't open the file again that way? Is that what's happening? And so I don't know how else I could have done those kinds of features without the intersected managed scopes. But man, all of those names, the names I gave you for understanding that stuff were bad, and I did not do a good job of trying to explain why it was all set up the way it was. It's kind of a cool system though. So point is, these variables, dynamic variables in here, completely different game from the variables that I set up out here in the custom layer. Not related to each other at all. Also opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how good the core idea is. The one on the inside of the core is good. The one on the outside is bad. So what we need for a config system is a plan that looks like this. There should be a text format, and let's call it a config format, which is kind of what we have. These should be able to convert back and forth losslessly, right? There might be some cases, if we get a little bit more specific, where it's like config or a list of errors, right? And then a config should always be able to go back out to a text file seamlessly. Then we should be able to easily do some of the following things. We need to be able to put different sorts of structures on that config and get them out. So a config is it going to have the ability to say, given a key, I'll say if you give me a config and a key, then I can try to get a config out. So it's a sub config of that thing. I should be able to try to take a config and get a string value out of it. I should be able to try to get an integer value out of it. I should be able to, well, let me tell you what a key is going to be. A key is going to be the kind of thing where you either started with a string or an integer, and that gave you a key. I think at some point, Terry's Python's asking a good question. Is there any chance you can share the ending notes you've written from all these 4coder Fridays? I know I can go to the VODs, pull them out, blah, 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 blah. Yes, so here's my plan. I've been thinking about this. I'm not ready to commit to writing a new 4coder still. But I think as we're working on this project, I will at some point take a day, and instead of digging into new stuff, I will dig through all of the things I've already written and make one big summary and make a blog post out of it. I might take like a whole week. Maybe this will be an October or a November project. I believe the first 4coder first began in 2014 of like November or December. So maybe here we are 10 years later. I could do a retrospective blog post and set you up to have all the pointers you need to the big problems and my suggestions on how to fix them. And try to get that done in the next few months. Let me answer your question. T Melmister. I'm going to answer your question. It's a great one. Just let me finish sketching out the plan first. The suggestion, the idea. Okay, these are all maybes. We probably also want to be able to go from config to a kind, where kind is like an enum. Like this, it'll be like, it can be a compound or a string or an integer or a float. Yep, I agree. I will work on that. Key will be either a string or an integer. Trying to think if there's anything else I would want based on everything we looked at. Well, okay. So here are the things we have so far. We have parse and we have render. So this part, to answer your question, text to config is a parser. So the idea is this is not about file formats, although file formats are valid here. Here I'm specifically thinking about in-memory data structures. So config would be an in-memory data structure, text would be an in-memory text buffer, and a list of errors would be some kind of linked list or structure with error information and location information for the errors or whatever. And so this is the arrow. This is the concept of taking in the information as a text file or as a text buffer and constructing an in-memory config data structure from it, right? And that's not a file format. The file format that corresponds to any of this right now would just be a .txt file or a .4coder file or whatever. The render, similarly, takes a config and says, if we've got a valid config that works, spit out a text file using the default layout rules, so indentation, new lines according to an algorithm, such that that text file would parse to reconstruct the original config. That way we have, if we have a valid 4coder file, 4coder config file, then this becomes a conversion from text to config, and this is the conversion back to the same text file, right? And you can just convert back and forth for all of time and not lose any information or any relevant information. If you have an invalid text file, you would get a list of errors to go with your config, and then when you render this back out, you might lose some of the information. The text file here was sort of not within bounds, so the conversion back and forth isn't guaranteed to work anymore. This is a partial function from config to text. Not all text files will come out of that, right? Now let's keep going. I'm gonna help you all understand more of this. So this is our text config. This lets us solve problems like we can dump a config, we can load a config in from anywhere we want, and if it parses successfully or not, we have something to dump, right? We can dump the config back out by just turning it back into text. We can dump the errors out because that'll have its own, you know, there'll be some kind of logic for turning that into text as well. So we can dump the results of a parse. Then there's config reading. Config reading is important for when we're using config data structures to run things like bindings, themes, config variables, and project files, right? So to give you an idea of how I'm imagining this works, when you first get your config file back out, the config data structure by itself would usually be, like the root one would usually have, each config structure would have a kind. Now, maybe calling all of these config is confusing, right? I could switch from calling these config to calling these cell. Okay, so our parser gives us a cell if it can, and a list of errors. A cell can go back to being a text file. An error can go to being text. When we are Now, when we're writing procedures to read stuff out, we want to be able to take a cell and say, hey, if you give me a key, so that'd be either a string or an integer, I should be able to take a cell and a key and get back a cell, possibly. I could also get back a nil, right? So there'll be a nil cell. I could add that to the list here. There'll be a nil cell. And then this isn't a question mark anymore. We always get back a cell. Sometimes it's just the nil cell. But that lets us query for things out of the cell. Right, and so when you have a cell, you can ask what kind of cell you have, and it'll be one of these. If it's a compound, then you access it by doing this. This is the way you read your compounds. But there might be other ways we want to read our compounds. We might be able to, so this is for compounds. This is for string, integer, and float. If you have a compound, then when you put in a key, you outpop a cell. You might also want to be able to just outpop a list of keys paired off with cells, so that you can just comprehend your compound instead of having to query into it. Yeah, might as well. And in interest of simplifying, we'll just assign a default. So instead of having a question mark there, if it's not a string, you get an empty string. If it's not an integer, you get a 0. If it's not a float, you get a 0. If it's not a boolean, you get a false or whatever, right? Or you make a truthy type or whatever. Now, keep in mind here, I see people like, you know, combining these things. If you want to do something like cell, so this is from Abegderic or something like that. If you wanted something like this, the reason I wouldn't add this is is simply a composition of this with this. It's already covered by the design. I'm not really worried about the convenience APIs that may or may not go along with a system like this. I'm mostly worried about like what are the core features of the structure that I want. Procedural reading, and then we need another one, which is, well, I mean, this alone gets us to, we can write the text files and generate them, deal with them, and parse stuff out of them. 4coder does not have any mechanisms right now for manually modifying the config except to go modify the text files themselves, right? So I think this is where I would stop. I would not bother. Something I have in this current variable system is there's like all of this mutational stuff, set, string, right? It's all, you create these things, you set them, you erase them. I wouldn't do any of that. I'd say screw all of that. I would just make this data structure. Why don't we take a look at what this would look like? I'm gonna just write some new 4coder code for the first time ever. Let's call this cell.h. fcoder cell.h. It would look like this. We'll call this the cell system. So we're going to have a cell. That's good. That's good. We're going to need cell kinds. Something like this. Key cell key So the cell actually has to contain its own key. So right here I said key and cell. But when we're doing Lego bricking, what we do is we say like, hey, if I need a key and cell, then instead of making a special type of list that's a key and cell, I just make the cell have the ability to give me a key. That's the key that comes with the cell, right? So now we need a key type. This would be like this. Except I guess I'll just use the existing kind type for string and integer here. Here's our key. But I don't really like that I have to union up like that. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say we're going to have a key string. I'm going to have a key integer. Maybe we put key right there and union those. And then we'll go kind, key kind. Val kind next to each other like that. Poopy. Yeah, I understand. But you already have a way to do that. You have a way to check if something has a key by doing this, right? You just go, is this cell a key? Or put the cell and key in. If the thing that comes out is non-nil, then you have that key. Right? This already does that. Key kind, val kind, string. If the val kind is a compound, then we contain the compound as children. Right? So that's what a cell will look like. We're also going to want error type. That looks something like this. Then you make a parse result, and your parse result contains a root cell and an error list. Right, and then all you gotta do is implement some stuff. And this would look like this. You'd go boom, that's how you parse it. Parse result gives us the cell and list of errors. There's the output list for the cell. Yeah, so the position of an error is just a pointer into a text buffer. So we just need a pointer to one of the bytes in our buffer. That tells us where the error occurred. We will need a little bit of help turning an error into an actual line number, file name, line number, and column number, which means this has to look like this now. Actually, it probably has to look like this. File name, and text, and error. We'll call this one string eyes. I like that better. So this looks like this. We put in an arena for the memory allocation. We put in a cell error. We put in a file name. And we put in the basic text block that we parsed. Organize this like this. Contextual stuff on top, the main parameter, and then the output. Okay. Why is the text not a string 8 if that's a type you have? And of course, there's something you can do here. The text here is you're gonna have to scan for the number of lines every time you print string eyes an error. So you might want to switch this out with an acceleration. So that's an option to think about at some point. And then you would do now, this is your core API. This is not a convenient API, and let me show you why. Say I've got this is going to end up looking something like this. We've got an F key index. I might say that the structure of my cells for my project system will say that the F key list is I still need these two as well. Um, and then, of course, I want to be able to do a comprehension of the entirety of the children. So this would be like this. Cell child next, cell parent, cell. These would be called parent and parent. So this gets child from key. This gets in iterations, we put in a 0 and out pops the first, and then we put in the first and out pops the second, and so on and so on and so on until we get to the end and we get a 0 back out. That's how we know we're done iterating. So now we can iterate all the cells that way if we would like. And then that reminds me, is Discord ready to open? Why isn't Discord opening today? Nobody knows, right? Go onto it with the browser instead. Figure out Discord tomorrow. Just trying to keep an eye. We're currently at 12:30. I'm expecting Abner to start streaming anytime, so I'm just keeping an eye out. But let's see. So let's get back to what the problem is here. So we've got the project. We want to get child from key string. Here's the project cell, and then I'd be like, okay, get me my F keys, right? And then, okay, so we've got our F keys. Cool. Now I want to use this key index. So I'll go cell F key command equals cell child from key integer. F key index, right? F key. Great. And then, of course, there's going to be run project command. This would be like prj run F key command. This would be like prj run command cell, and F key command. There's our command cell, right? So that's the root of a command. Which then looks like this. Run command cell. I see. I'm not sure if the code I'm running is possibly older. If Terrace Python fixed the pasting bug, I'm not running 4cc. I'm running the final version of 4coder. So the fact that I still have the bug could just mean that it got fixed and I didn't update. F key index. What? There's a macro bug, as in the keyboard macro? Is that like pasting inside of a keyboard macro doesn't work? And is that because of the sequence index problem? That would make sense. Here we're executing a command by name. We go in project command from name. Oh man, so many layers of re-indexing. This is even worse. Like, this code is even worse than it has to be. Even though the layer underneath it is bad, it's worse than that. Okay. So when we get the command string from var, we figure out which one, right? So the first thing it has to do is figure out which OS to grab that from that. So let's start there. Command var OS ID gives us a string. The command string is going to be like this: cell here's where it's going to get tricky. So I want to get a string out of the thing whose keyed by, okay, cell child from key string project straightlit OS name, right? So I basically say, give me the child whose name matches the current operating system. That's going to return a cell. So we end up with command cell equals this, and then cell val string on the command cell, right? So you can see it takes 2 lines. We know the name of the key. We know we want a string from it. So we have to go from name to cell and cell to string to get the thing we want. And that's going to happen a lot at this layer. Right, we're going to go, here it is again, we're going to want buffer name cell equals cell child from key string. This is going to be the command cell. Command cell. Command cell. Call this the cell, I guess. I don't know. Command string cell. Cell. Straight lit, buffer name, project.4coder, win Linux. Okay, it's called the out. Val boolean footer panel cell footer panel cell child from key string cell straight lit footer panel, right? So you can kind of see this pattern here. So I think at this point, what would make life a little bit easier is if we could start using something like a different syntax. So this would be like extracting without helper functions, extracting with helper functions. And here's where I want to go. Okay, command string is going to be cell val string from key string. But you see how this starts to get really difficult, the combinatorics here. Each possible key val pair has to go in like this. Val from key doesn't work because we want to return a string. String from key cell cell key string. Shit, I don't know. None of this really makes it simpler, so maybe there's no helper. Maybe this is fine the way it is. Well, this one right here is exec command, takes in the variable and runs it. That's what I'm doing here, right? This is exec command. Mixer ID asks a great question. Why does the clipboard, let's see, what is this? Let's go to Win32 4ed CDP, look for clipboard. Post clipboard does not post to the operating system clipboard. It posts to an internal buffer. Clip post, which then gets posted. Right? And the answer to the question for that is because I was inspired by Handmade Hero, where the idea of a lot of stuff was not to put operating system abstractions as subservient to the core, but rather to implement the core in the operating system specific way. Basically, you implement the core main loop and the operating system specific stuff are both in context, and then you have a subservient application core that you call to. So a lot of stuff was structured that way, and I don't really like it. I think it would be easier to do it the way you're suggesting, which just say when the application says I'm ready to post to a clipboard, you just do the work there that makes it work. That's what I would do now. All right, let me catch up with Terry's Python real quick. The cell that gets passed to this from the function above. So this cell here, in this case, I'm thinking of this as matching one of these, right? I guess you're saying here it's a name. Yeah, so like the one does not point to a command. The one points to a name. You're right. So this is like this. This is F key command cell. This is F key command name. String from val string. So we get the val string from this cell. This index gives us one of these. That gives us a name. And then we need this project's command list cell equals cell child from key string project straightlit commands cell f key command cell equals cell child from key string command list cell f key command name, and then this becomes the cell we pass here. Yeah. it's 100% true. This doesn't work, so we got to do from string f key name string 8 f key name equals straight push f. I'm using new naming schemes, not old naming schemes here. Forgive me if that's annoying. F %u f key index arena temp scratch equals arena get scratch release scratch. So I've been sort of pointing out the biggest problem I'm going to have with this sort of system is that since I don't have helpers here, there's these kind of extra steps. Like you have a cell, you index into it with a name, you get a cell. You index into it with a name, you get a cell. You finally extract something. So this, if it was a scripting language, would just look like this. F key commands name equals F keys, you know, it'd be something like F key name and then you'd have cell command cell equals so let's see, this right here is projects dot, right, and this would be projects dot commands f key command name, right? So you can see like this is the syntax. That would be nice. We could even imagine like if this was a scripting language, it could go further and be like, oh, this will be some kind of string expanding syntax that might look like this or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of stuff you could do to keep on making this denser and denser. As C code, it has to look like this. So there you go. That's the idea. That's how I would do it. And using this here, we would then be able to do something like project commands exec. And then eventually it just gets to the point where you've got all the parameters pulled out, and then you just end up with execute the command, and hopefully you have some kind of underlying helper here that lets you get all of the parameters in one spot. Maybe you even go get even fancier and you go like this will be like a command. This will be, let's see, we want we need a namespace for stuff that goes in the default behaviors. So something like, it's really unfortunate to name your project with a number at the beginning because you can't use identifiers like that. But what if we did like F for 4coder, FC for 4coder default, FC default, 4coder defaults, something like that. Or 4coder system command params, right? You'd end up with stuff like this. This is just suggestions of how I wish 4coder looked. So the command string could get filled in, the output buffer could get filled in. You could also set the output buffer like this. You go out buffer and have like, you know, buffer ID from, what was this? Buffer from, there used to be a way to do this, API implementation, buffer, buffer get buffer. Was this the way I named things back in the day? Get buffer by name. Lame, but okay. Right, it'd be like that or something. But of course, this has to be one that creates it if it doesn't already exist. So if that's not the right one for that, then I don't know. It's like, whatever. I don't know. something like that, right? I think I would go with FC now, just to keep it short. 4coder custom exec command. These are all the built-in things. We would probably namespace this like that. 4coder custom. 4coder custom. Right? I don't know. Point is, I think something like this could have been a lot cleaner than what I ended up with. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how I'll save this cell file so I can share it as a part of the progress of making notes on 4coder. But I'm going to wrap up for today. If you want to check out 4coder, go over to 4coder.net. If you want to support the Mr. Forth Lab, which includes 4coder Fridays, it includes the PE Cough deep dives. We're working on a visualizer over there. Later today, I'm going to be working on my plan for the Handmade Network Wheel Reinvention Jam. But right now, I'm going to send you over to Abner Quainbray's stream, where he's going to be working on some 4coder stuff with BYP, who's been hanging out in chat. They are trying to get Abner set up with Vim key bindings. So I'm going to send everyone over there. I might hang out there for a bit while I'm eating some lunch. And I'll see you all later. Give me a sec while I figure out how to do that. All right, cool. And I'll see y'all around the internet. Bye.